This is a regal issue of a King George III halfpence. Halfpennies such as these form the backbone of small change in colonial America. However, the economic and political issues leading to the currency shortages during the rule of King George II were still in place, and as such, much of the circulating coinage were not regal issues, instead being counterfeits. By this point, the counterfeits were being produced at industrial scales and made to much higher standards than the widespread cast counterfeits of King George II, covered in a previous episode. Despite this, these counterfeits were still smaller and underweight than regal issues, making them inferior to the actual issues produced by the Royal Mint, however, much more preferable than the wide variety of low-quality casts produced previously. You can see very clearly that the coin is of very high quality. It has high relief and very sharp details. The obverse depicts the king dressed as a Roman emperor, with the legend Georgius III Rex, which translates to George III King. The reverse depicts Britannia, with the legend reading the same. The reverse also contains the date. This one is dated 1771. Notice the J-like retrograde ones in the date. By the time King George had come to the throne, counterfeiting operations were well established in both the British Isles and colonial America, with counterfeits circulating prominently. By this point, the quality of counterfeits had grown considerably, with most looking like decent approximations of the regal coins, aside from weight or diameter. Here is an example of a particularly nice counterfeit. Aside from the size and clipped panchet, the untrained eye would likely not identify this coin as a counterfeit at first glance. The bust overall has a good level of detail. The armor is cruder, but not noticeably so, without a direct comparison. The hair is much more roughly engraved, lacking the depth of relief present on the original regal issue. The face is less lifelike as well, though still convincing without direct comparison. Aside from the bit cut off the planchet, the full legend is present and legible. It is easy to see how this coin could be confused for a regal issue. Unfortunately, the reverse of the coin has been damaged by some bronze disease, making a direct comparison of details with the regal issue difficult. Though relatively rare on coins of this era, counterfeits are much more susceptible to bronze disease than regal issues due to the higher levels of impurity in their copper, something that was not an issue when they were made, but is an issue for modern collectors. This coin is dated 1775, which is the most common date for counterfeit coins of this time period. In terms of diameter and weight, it is only slightly smaller than the regal issue. Again, it would likely pass for one in everyday use without a close inspection. Not all counterfeits were of such high quality, however, with some being much closer to those made in the reign of King George II. This coin is a good example of such a counterfeit. While not quite as monkey-like as the simian-struck coins of George II, this coin features similar craftsmanship and level of detail. Something interesting about this coin, however, is its date, 1741, a date that should be a King George II offering. This mismatched pairing of obverse and reverse is called a mule within collecting circles. The existence of such mules implies that either the counterfeiters were producing both King George II and the third counterfeits at the same time, or counterfeiters were getting very overzealous with their backdating of coins. An interesting specimen nonetheless. This coin is significantly smaller and lighter than the regal issue. I don't know about you, but I likely would have readily spotted this counterfeit, though I may have accepted it anyway, as the currency shortage was acute and ongoing. Finally, we take a look at two counterfeits that are more likely representative of the average quality of counterfeits in the colonies at this time. Taking a look at the first coin, we see a very shallow relief. So shallow that if you were to run your fingers over the coin, it feels almost flat. The bust broadly follows the detail and proportion of the regal issue, with the armor in particular being very convincingly done. However, the head is where the details fall apart. The hair is coarse and lacks the beautifully engraved flowing curls of the regal issue. The face is even worse, making the king look almost like a Muppet. The legend is present but almost worn away due to the low relief height. The reverse is a little better, with Britannia too having a Muppet-like appearance. The legend, likewise, is almost worn away, and the coin lacks a date. The coin is significantly smaller and lighter than the regal issue. Now let's take a look at the other counterfeit. This one is of similar workmanship to our previous, but managed to get the bust wrong in different ways. While some of the individual details are more convincing, for example the hair, while chorus is fairly close to the regal issue, the shape of the head as a whole is just off. I find the large forehead on this coin particularly amusing, though there are many other silly details on this coin, such as the strange proportions, especially in the king's jowls and thick neck. The coin's legend barely fits on the coin, but is present and readable. The reverse shares the odd proportions of the obverse, especially in Britannia's long neck and narrow head. The reverse legend was done with much less skill and as a result is incomplete and lacking a date. The coin is significantly smaller and underweight than the regal coin. By the reign of King George III, counterfeits were a common sight and commonly accepted part of life in colonial America, and they would continue to be so until long after the Revolution. Many counterfeits were brought to the colonies from Britain, where merchants would buy up the lowest quality and most crude and cheaply import them to the American colonies, where they could be spent for a much higher value than what could be found for them in Britain. There were also several large counterfeiting operations established in the colonies, turning out the coins by the thousands, something that increased their longevity as tender. The most famous of these was Mansion's Mills in New York, which following independence became a legally sanctioned producer of counterfeit British coppers.